Welcome into the Archip Sports Business Podcast. This is episode 24, and in this episode, we're going to do kind of a supplement to the previous episode that we did where we interviewed Jeff Benedict, the author of the Dynasty, which was about the New England Patriots. In this episode, we're going to do a supplement. We're going to talk a little bit about NFL teams overall. We're going to talk about the New England Patriots overall. When I say overall, I mean some revenue, earnings, team value, that kind of stuff. We're going to compare it to the average. We're going to compare it to the Tennessee Titans because that's where I'm from. We're going to do a little bit of that kind of stuff so you'll get kind of a good overview of the NFL, a basic characterization of what the teams look like in terms of how much they're worth, etc. And then we'll go from there, and in future episodes, we'll compare it to Formula One. It'll give you some context for Formula One and cycling and some of those different types of things to see where the NFL falls in that case. So here we go. Let's talk a little bit about the NFL and the overall team values. All right, so this data is from Statista, and we've used them before. And basically, so the average value of an NFL team right now is estimated at $3.04 billion. The revenue of all of the teams combined is $15.62 billion. The team with the highest revenue individually, and this is won't be surprising to many people, is the Dallas Cowboys at $980 million revenue. So, as I mentioned before, let's look at the New England Patriots. This was the subject of the book, The Dynasty, by Jeff Benedict, and Jeff Benedict was interviewed on this podcast on the last episode, which we appreciated. And in that interview, we went through some of the stuff. There's a lot of color. And in the book, it does talk a little bit about, what was paid for the franchise and et cetera, et cetera. So when Bob Kraft bought the franchise, the New England Patriots, when Bob Kraft paid for the franchise, he paid $170 million. And I think about $140 million, $150 million of that was debt financed by Bank of Boston. Yeah, so actually $172 million in 1994. And then, of course, it's had huge amounts of winning since then. So what is that worth? Now, again, a lot of this is going to be driven by the overall television contracts. But, of course, Bob Kraft was involved in negotiating some of those deals. So let's look at it, just kind of this sort of overall. So overall, the value of the New England Patriots is $4.4 billion. Okay, so that's pretty significantly above the average of $3.04 billion. The revenue was $630 million, and the operating income was $250 million. Players' salaries $251 million, and ticket sales $105 million. So that's interesting. You've got $630 million in total revenue, and which is just slightly above the league average. So again, there's 32 teams. The league revenue $15.62 billion. So that's slightly above average there, or that's above average there. And then you've got ticket sales at $105 million. So ticket sales are a little under 1/6 of the overall revenue. So again, let's run that against the Tennessee Titans as an example. Now, of course, the Tennessee Titans are a smaller market. They're the market that I'm in, so that's why we're comparing them. And they're also really good this year. They're a good team. I don't know if they've played yet today. This is a Sunday that we're recording. Let's see. And they're being destroyed right now by the Cleveland Browns, 7-38 at halftime. So maybe I spoke too soon, but we're still going to use them to compare. All right, here we go. So again, this is from Statista, and franchise value $2.3 billion. So about $700 million below the average franchise value. So again, on the low end, right? So $2.3 billion. $422 million in revenue, again below the average. Operating income $57 million, again versus that $250 million a year from the New England Patriots. And ticket sales $60 million, so about 40% lower in ticket sales than the New England Patriots. Players' salaries again still at $250 million. That's most teams are going to be right around that number. That being roughly the salary cap. And again, yeah, operating income 57 million versus that 250 million on the New England Patriots. But of course, the New England Patriots are not 4 or 5 times as valuable as the Tennessee Titans, being that they're both NFL teams there, and there's other factors included in the valuation. And $2.3 billion for the Tennessee Titans is the estimated value. But like any NFL franchise these days, if it were to go up for sale or be known to be for sale, there would probably be several bidders, and that number may be even higher. Okay, so again, we've got those averages. We've got a smaller market team like the Tennessee Titans that's doing very well, has been doing very well the last few seasons. But again, is a smaller market, isn't winning at a Super Bowl level, smaller stadium, etc., compared to something like the New England Patriots and what they've done. Now, Bob Kraft buying it for $172 million in 1994, financed mostly by debt. Now, that was fully paid off, I believe, in 2005. It's mentioned in the book, The Dynasty. So, and now you've got this operating income of $250 million going forward. And again, as we've talked about in previous episodes, these franchises are not going to trade at something like 10 times operating income or 8 times operating income. Many of these franchises, again, with the roster depreciation allowance, with the deals that they have with the cities, with being a part of the NFL and the NFL's overall ability to negotiate these TV deals, you're sort of part of all of these other cities. You're part of these TV deals that all these other cities have. Effectively, half your revenue is divided up league-wide revenue. These teams sell for a lot more, and people want to own them. They're very visible. A lot of times, somebody will have a huge business career. They've done amazing things and given a lot of money to charity and all of this kind of stuff. And then, they're 60, 70 years old. They buy an NFL team, and that's all they're known for. That's all anybody knows them for. It's a very visible place to be. It's a very visible thing. And to someone who wants that, a billionaire or a group, and many times in the NFL it is a billionaire and not a group. There's no substitute. So the numbers get very, very large. And again, they probably would sell, quite honestly, it depends, but probably something like 20, 25 times that operating income would not be outrageous, and that would not be the only basis for valuing the franchise. But many of them do sell more around that type of a number. As I mentioned, with the Tennessee Titans being valued at $2.3 billion, $57 million operating income, most likely, if they were to go up for sale, and there were a couple bidders, which would be, again, likely, especially in a city that's growing like Nashville, they would probably exceed that $2.3 billion, even with that give or take $60 million of operating income. Now, and again, lots of factors, roster depreciation allowance, many other things that go into that, and that make that operating income number much more attractive, and make ownership of the franchise a lot more attractive. Okay, so now we've compared, again, the Tennessee Titans, we've compared New England Patriots. New England Patriots are, in recent history, the most winning franchise, so they've gone from, something that was purchased $172 million all the way up to this $4 billion. They would probably sell for $5 billion, quite honestly, if they were to sell. We heard, rumors, of course, that a couple of years ago, the owner of the Indianapolis Colts turned down $4 billion for the team. This is pretty telling. And again, like I said, if any franchise were to go up for sale, it would probably, unless it was a very small market, set records. Okay, so let's compare that to the Dallas Cowboys, which we know has the most revenue, is always considered the most valuable. Let's see what that's worth and what that does for the league. Actually, real quick, we mentioned the Indianapolis Colts. We mentioned that $4 billion was turned down for the Indianapolis Colts. According to Statista, they have a $66 million operating income, and they're valued at $2.85 billion. So, of course, something valued at $2.85 billion, somebody gives you $4 billion, you'd consider it. This was flat turned down early in the talks, is what we've heard. So there you go. Now let's look at the Dallas Cowboys. All right, big old Dallas Cowboys. Again, let me just quickly reiterate the averages. Okay, so again, average franchise value, $3.04 billion. And again, that's according to Statista. But again, we know it's probably much higher than that. There's a limited number. And again, as we've talked about in previous episodes, the number of teams is controlled by the current group of teams. And if a new team were to come in, it would be evaluated that it's at the benefit for league-wide revenue. It's at a benefit for shared revenue. So it's going to let everybody else's franchise go up, or they wouldn't let them in. And then even in that case, when they view it as a positive, there's usually a franchise fee that's paid to these other teams. So you're very protected in that sense. And that's one of the reasons that these franchise values go up so much, is basically the number of teams is controlled by the current teams. So your real competition is people turning away from the product in general, turning away from football or a rival league, obviously. Okay, so again, $3.04 billion, but probably higher in when they sell, if they were to sell. Total revenue $15.26 billion, and team with the highest revenue, Dallas Cowboys at $980 million. So now let's look at these again. These are just high-level financials. This is just for entertainment, to get to to have a feeling and an understanding and a basis for looking at NFL teams' values, earnings, etc., and to have a basis to look at other things like Formula One teams and their earnings, and cycling teams and their earnings, etc., which is much less. All right. So Dallas Cowboys franchise value, they estimate at $5.7 billion. That's probably, Statista. That's probably what they have it plugged in as Forbes. If it were to sell, now that's getting up there. $5.7 billion is getting up there. If that were to sell, most likely it would break 6, and it would kind of be a name your price, and it might have to be a group that comes in, or who knows. But $5.7 billion is what it's valued at. The revenue, again, as we said, this is from 2019. The revenue $980 million, and operating income $425 million. So the Dallas Cowboys, who are kind of known as this perpetual 8-8 team, have $425 million in operating income, whereas the New England Patriots, who have been totally dominant, have a $250 million operating income. Now, again, that's good. The $250 million is good, and with the roster depreciation allowance and some various things like that, it's a bit. It could be a bit better than that, but that's what they've got it listed at. And then, interestingly enough, Dallas Cowboys ticket sales, $96 million, remember, versus that $105 million from the New England Patriots. That's pretty interesting. So the New England Patriots, even though they don't have Jerry World, they outsell the Dallas Cowboys in terms of ticket sales. And then Dallas Cowboys player salaries are actually at $231 million, again, in that 2019, compared to the Titans that were at $250, and compared to, again, the New England Patriots that were at $250. Now, these numbers, again, are according to Statista, and they're from 2019. So people that are really into the salary cap, it's not something that I would treat as 100% accurate at this moment or at any given moment. Of course, this salary cap management is a whole nother animal. Where the team is on the salary cap varies really week to week, month to month. So I wouldn't go totally in on that, but as far as big contracts and salaries, etc., you get an idea of where these teams are. Are they up against the salary cap? Are they not? Just in general over that 2019 season. So again, that was just a supplement to the previous episode that we did where we interviewed Jeff Benedict, who wrote the book, The Dynasty. It's a great book. It talks about the New England Patriots, which really were probably the most dominant sports franchise really in the last century in major professional sports. But again, even with that, and they did a great job, and they've built the stadium, and they've made some changes, and Bob Kraft has run that to be, a franchise that was probably, without the winning would be valued at $2-3 billion, to now with the winning valued at $4 billion. He did a lot for the league in terms of negotiating these TV deals to get revenue for all of these owners. But it is interesting that something like the Dallas Cowboys, being in that big market, are still worth more, produce more, even without the types of ticket sales, and certainly without the type of winning that the New England Patriots have achieved. So again, this is entertainment purposes, broad stroke type of episode. There's not a lot of detail here, but it is interesting and it's intuitive, and people know this. They know Manchester United, even if, Man City wins a couple championships in a row, Man United is still worth more, and, for a number of reasons. And the main one being it's the stronger brand. I mean, that's kind of the overarching idea. And that stronger brand is able to be monetized more. They're a rival to more, different teams. And again, we've got an episode on rivalry you can go back and listen to with Dr. Cody Havard, where we talk about that in more detail. And that, again, is a proxy for brands in college, and it's a proxy for brand value in college. And again, that's a proxy for brand value here. How many teams view you as rivals, etc. So there are a lot of factors. But it's interesting that, you've got this team that wins a lot. You've got a team like the Titans who are winning a lot, but in a small market. And, the Titans are, like I said, they're getting destroyed by the Browns right now. I don't know, this is going to release probably Sunday evening, but they have been very successful, the Tennessee Titans. But the Nashville, even as it's growing, it's still a small market, and their earnings, their revenue, their franchise value is just totally dwarfed in comparison to the Dallas Cowboys, even though the Dallas Cowboys don't win